My name is Jenna, and this is my online oral report for my Drama 15 class. And the play I chose to do my report on was FOB, or Fresh Off the Boat. And FOB was written by David Henry Wang, and in this play, Wang shows what it's like to be Chinese and in America. So for my report, I'm going to focus on the aspect of the character development of Dale, or really the lack thereof of character development of Dale, and how it causes dramatic tension throughout the entire play. The play has three main characters: Grace, Steve, and Dale. Dale is a second-generation American, so he was born and raised in America, and he is of Asian descent. Grace is a first-generation American, so she was born in China and then came over to the United States when she was really young. And although she's been in America for a while, she still holds the customs and values of China in a very high regard, and a much higher regard than what Dale does. And then lastly, Steve. Steve is an exchange student from China, and he just came over to America, so he's literally fresh off the boat. Ultimately, in the play, Dale mocks Steve because Dale feels Steve represents the Chinese immigrants and their sad attempts at fitting in and trying to assimilate into American culture, while at the same time refusing to give up their traditional Chinese values and ways. So Dale does this only because he is more Americanized than his cousin Grace and Steve, the exchange student. So the specific character that I'm going to focus on from the play is Dale. And as I said before, Dale really doesn't change throughout the entire play. He's a second-generation American, and he's been so Americanized that he ignores his Chinese culture and the traditions and values that go along with it. So in the beginning of the play, Dale begins with this long monologue that mocks the Asian immigrants who are new and who just came to America. He degrades them in many ways, and when Dale first meets Steve, he asks Steve if he can speak English. And when Steve says that he can really only speak a little bit of English, Dale immediately begins to make fun of Steve. He began to mock him in an Asian descent, and then Dale basically made assumptions about who Steve was as a person solely based on the fact that he only knew a little bit of English. And Steve and Dale, kind of in the middle of the play, they begin like competing against each other. And Dale, of course, suffers in one of these little competitions because he tries to force himself to eat a plate of spicy food in some like lame attempt to prove that he's somehow better than Steve. The central theme of FOB is how assimilation for new Asian immigrants who come to the United States is very difficult, and how they often receive a lot of hostility from Americans of Asian descent. Steve is new to the United States and receives a lot of grief from Dale, who is Chinese but was born in the United States. So it's difficult for Steve to fit in, and Dale makes it basically harder on him by being so mean. Dale would make comments like, "You FOBs are so sneaky. No wonder they check you so close at immigration." And I'd trade him in for a vacuum cleaner any day. Dale makes these comments in an attempt to humiliate Steve. Dale mocks Steve's accent, makes fun of him for not being able to speak English all that well. But really, Dale gives no consideration to the fact that Steve literally just came over to the United States from China. So up until now, Steve had no need to really speak English, and so for Dale to make fun of Steve for that is really it's not very fair. Even though Steve and Dale are both of Asian descent, they are very different. In the second act of the play, Dale tries to help Steve by making him more like John Travolta. He he tries to force Steve to change in order to fit in and be more like everyone else. He wanted Steve to be more Americanized, and the fact that Steve didn't want to change, it made Dale mad. And Grace would this whole time Grace is trying to get Dale to lay off of Steve and quit being so mean to him. But Dale refuses. He refuses to change. He refuses to change his opinion of Steve, and continue to say degrading remarks and show a lot of hostility towards him. And Dale got even madder when he realized that Steve understood Grace better than he did. Grace is Dale's cousin, so really Dale should understand her better than Steve, but it was the other way around. So that made Dale really mad. And then when Grace and Steve left together, that was kind of like the last straw. Dale was left alone, and he was stuck in his old ways. He still didn't change his opinion on the new Asian immigrants who were coming over from China, which is the group of people that Steve ultimately represents. And he was just making it harder for Steve to assimilate himself into America because he was being so mean. I think the fact that Dale was the only character who did not change was a significant point that Wang made. Because Dale had lived in America longer than Grace and Steve, it made it more difficult for him to understand or appreciate the Asian culture, the Asian cultural values that Grace and Steve had. He not only didn't understand them, but he didn't want to understand them. He wanted Grace and Steve to be more American, like him, and it frustrated him that they didn't want the same thing. They didn't want to forget their Chinese traditions, and so this leads to the resentment and hostility that Dale shows Steve. And I think that's why he was so mean to Steve, because they didn't want to be like him. They didn't want to be American like him. So the amount of time spent in America has changed the boys. Dale does not value his Chinese culture at all, and he has no respect for Steve, and is very hostile and resentful towards him. This is what causes the dramatic tension throughout the entire play. Grace is stuck in the middle. She's stuck in between the two boys, and it makes sense that she would be stuck in the middle because Grace knows what both of them are feeling. She's been kind of in both of their shoes. Grace was born in China, but then came over to the United States when she was really young. So she knows what it's like to not be able to fit in, not be able to assimilate into the American culture right away. So ultimately, Grace feels more for Steve, and she ultimately takes Steve's side because she too knows what it's like to be like fresh off the boat, and she didn't like how Dale was being so mean to Steve. Overall, the central theme of the play FOB is that assimilation for new coming Asian immigrants, the group of people that Steve represents, is extremely difficult, and they receive a lot of hostility from Asian Americans, like the group of people that Dale represents, and it ultimately makes their transition into American culture a lot harder and a lot tougher than it should be, and they get a lot of grief and hostility that really they shouldn't really get. And so I think the point that Wang is making by having Dale not change at all throughout the entire play is it goes back to the theme of the book that assimilation for these new immigrants is very tough, but people like Dale or like the Asian American make it a lot harder on them than it really should be. And I think that's the main point that Wang was trying to make by not having by not having Dale change at all. That's the point that Wang was trying to make.